In layman's terms, a pilot episode is a standalone episode used to pitch a show to a distributor. As the goal of a pilot is to get the show in the door and have the studio greenlight production, it must put its best foot forward in every aspect. Most successful pilots aren't used in the final aired product, but every now and then, some are used as the premiere episode to its show. This is the case with the amazing Digital Circus. Not only does the show reveal its premise with its pilot, it also reveals its flaws early on. Hello everybody, and welcome to the amazing and efficient pilot episode. In relation to the audience, a pilot episode is supposed to introduce the premise, setting, stakes, and characters of a series. Marketing-wise, it's still supposed to put its best foot forward to capture an audience for long-time viewing. Storytelling-wise, it's supposed to lay down the groundwork and tone for the plot. Pilots can make or break the coherency of a whole story. In fact, when a series devolves into something unsatisfactory or incoherent by its end, it's either because it's strayed too far from the foundation built in the pilot, or the pilot is disjointed from the rest of the series. Because the pilot is supposed to immediately set up the rest of the series and intrigue the audience into watching it the whole way through, it must be concise, balanced, and efficient. The audience has no investment in it yet, so it shouldn't waste their time. Visuals, dialogue, colors, music cues, storyboarding, even transitions, all of this must pack as much information as possible within the set runtime of an episode, and it must not pack in too much, nor too little. It must know when to hold back, and when to put its foot on the gas. The amazing Digital Circus has trouble with these things. While its first 3 minutes are tightly packed with information to set up the conflict and who's supposed to be the main character, the rest of the episode is filled with moments that can either be trimmed down, rearranged, or combined to make the writing more efficient, or leave space for other information. For example, there are 2 scenes where Pomni is given information on the layout of the circus. One exposition moment by Kane, where he, exposits the various areas of the circus, and another where Jax and Ragatha show Pomni the circus members in individual rooms. While the purpose of these scenes is obvious, to show 2 risks, the void and abstraction, efficient writing would have found a way to combine both the scenes together, because it's the same progression of events. The mechanism is the same, which is, information needs to be shown to the audience/audience stand-in. In this case, that's Pomni. Characters physically show audience/audience stand-in around. Information, risk, is introduced. Both scenes have different packaging, but in utility, they're the same. An argument that could be made for keeping both scenes is that the first one gives us the wide layout of the circus, and the second with Ragatha and Jax reveals information about their personalities. Ragatha is friendly and often takes on the blame for things that aren't her fault. Jax has no respect for other people's autonomy and only cares about his own entertainment. This could still be pared down. The second scene holds more weight and information, and by the end of the episode, Ken says that people aren't allowed in the void and he doesn't like people seeing his unfinished work anyway. So why not cut out the exposition scene entirely, and have the information about the void be dropped in the dialogue about Kaufmo? He was already said to be talking about exits. Why not have someone mention that he found something called the void? The secrecy of this information would further heighten the stakes, and when Pomni actually finds the void, the discovery would feel more important. Instead of nearly a minute of Kane expositing, we get information through a few seconds of dialogue, insight to how the other circus members view each other based on how they talk, and more space in the runtime. Other scenes that could be pared down are also jokes that run a little too long when they would be more effective snappier, or scenes that have already communicated the information they carry or achieved the effect they want to have in the story. The B-plot is especially egregious with this. We know, simply from Kane shouting about Gloinks and adventures, that he's supposed to be a bit of a try-hard and painfully unfunny. The character's reaction to him makes this obvious, though if he's not supposed to be written that way, the execution has fallen flat, then we still get a bit too much time with the Gloink Queen and keep being shown information we already know without further developing it. That Kane's adventures are nonsense. Jax is abrasive to his fellow circus members. Zubul hates going on adventures. King and the ribbon guy whose name I can't remember despite having just watched the episode 5 minutes before I wrote the script are unstable. There are scenes where Digital Circus knows to be efficient. Kane banishing Kaufmo into an unnerving void where all the abstractions are kept, for example, is a very short moment, and it only needed to be a short moment. The mystery of it keeps the viewer intrigued, and the brevity makes it unnerving. The first 3 minutes, again, quickly fired off the digital setting, the many characters that populated it, and how Pomni showed up there because she put on a headset. The small moment in the hallway where Pomni tries to help Ragatha before chickening out is incredibly informative of her character. All these scenes are written concisely and communicate plenty in the short seconds they run. There's just not enough of this efficiency in the pilot, which, as this episode is supposed to be a litmus test, is a bad omen for the rest of the series. Another problem with the Digital Circus's pilot episode is that it doesn't know how to hold tone because it wants to prioritize comedy. The colors, music, and framing of Pomni running through the exits and looping rooms all carry a bleak tone, only for the episode to then cut to the unfunny Gloink adventure where Kinga loses his hands trying to help Zubul, and Jax fires up one-liners. And this happens several times where Pomni's going through loop hell, so the tone constantly jumps from horror to comedy. It's essentially what people call Marvel writing these days, where there's an emotional scene that's immediately watered down by an attempt at humor. The purpose of this switching appears to be the contrast to what Pomni's going through and what the rest of the crew is going through, but its execution makes the tone suffer. Rearranging the scenes or even paring down the glowing queen scene, which, again, communicates information we already know and doesn't develop it further, but have furthered the bleak tone of Pomni running around. If the glowing queen scene had its own tone to develop and one that would have impacted the bleakness of Pomni's scene, like maybe both tones had a through line or it acted as a more impactful parallel, then maybe it would have been reasonable to jump back and forth. Protagonists are central to stories, since they're the viewpoint the audience gets most of their information from. They're crucial to setting genres, tone, narrative structure, everything that makes a story a story. We also set expectations. One of these expectations is who or what the focal point of the story is going to be. The pilot episode of Digital Circus frames Pomni as the protagonist. She's surrounded by other characters, yes, but the narrative follows her for most of the episode, so the audience is primed to think that this is her story, and the rest of the cast are supporting characters. As the protagonist, she has more narrative weight than everyone else. Therefore, whatever tone, themes, motivations, conflicts, or stakes the pilot introduces must mostly focus on her. Yes, there are other characters within the circus, but if they're not the protagonist, then the writing must economize and focus on the protagonist first. Supporting characters have the rest of the series to be explored. Focusing on too many things and characters at once when they're not the protagonist or central to the protagonist conflict means too many things packed into one episode. The thing is, though, Pomni's apparently not supposed to be the sole protagonist. She's a protagonist, not the protagonist. Digital Circus is apparently an ensemble cast, something which should be communicated in a pilot episode because, again, a pilot episode is supposed to be laying the groundwork for the rest of the series. If the issue is that there are too many characters to be explored in 25 minutes, the answer is to be efficient. That is why efficiency is important, so you don't miscommunicate to the audience, set up the wrong narrative expectations, don't deliver on those narrative expectations, and end up with something incoherent. Efficiency and economy leaves space within the 25-minute runtime of the pilot episode. That space can be used to introduce the personal status quo of each of the ensemble cast's members, their personal motivations, personal conflicts, personal stakes. But because the pilot only focuses on Pomni, the narrative then introduces Pomni as the protag, and you can't fault an audience for mistaking the show to be a solo protagonist story instead of an ensemble. This is not a matter of media comprehension, this is a matter of writing and efficiency. Combine scenes that have the same utility. Pare down jokes that only need a few seconds to set up, execute, and land. Shorten minute-long moments that achieve the same result in 30 seconds. All of this editing precision adds up to more minutes left to explore things that a pilot should set up. And if you economize enough, you can even get legroom to stretch and hammer in moments you really want to land. And because you use this stretching out sparingly, it hits the audience with more impact. The shape of something can only really be defined in contrast to the negative space it occupies. So, let's contrast Digital Circus with another speculative adult animation show. Let's look at the pilot of another glitch production, The Knights of Gunver. Within the first 2 minutes and a half of Gunver, 30 seconds shorter than Digital Circus, we get the setting and the conflict. A robotic princess lives tortured by a little girl and her father in this massive park. This park uses imagery to sell products and market fun. The princess is so tormented She would rather jump up a balcony than endure another moment of this existence. The father is concerned by her actions, but the daughter isn't. She seems to be more sinister than her father. In the next 2 minutes, we're introduced to our two protagonists who are framed by the narrative as joint protagonists, Andrea and Frankie. They meet a Guinevere android with a glitching finger, which Frankie fixes. Then we timeskip. We see Andrea and Frankie as adults. Through dialogue, we're immediately given information that Andrea is a crony, and through the camera panning away while Andrea is arguing with the store owner, we're given the information that Frankie has pursued a talent with technology by hacking a vending machine. Notice how so much is communicated to the audience within the first 4 minutes. The fact that we have two protagonists, one tortured princess, one possible main villain, and one supporting villain. We immediately get all their personalities and their status quos, how Andy and Frankie interact with each other and their environment. We have the setting, the nickname Crownie for employees like Andy, the protagonist's socioeconomic situation with how depressing the background and the colors of the city are, the contrast of this to how bright and colorful everything was when they met Guinevere. Then, we learn about Frankie's work through visuals, interactions, and dialogue. Her work scraping garbage out of the ocean, the plastic she gets being reused to make keychains, the park that floats overhead. Plenty of information packed into such a small time frame through different ways. Then the exciting incident. Frankie fishes out a Guinevere android. Her boss takes it into storage and plans to chop it up. But Frankie feels bad for it because she still remembers when she met that Gwyn android years ago. We then switch to Andrea's work and how, though she's supposed to have a better job than Frankie, she's still not having a great time, especially when she's getting cuffed on by people and not as talented with machinery as Frankie is. This scene is very brief. We don't meander through Andrea's day even though the show has two protagonists. We are only shown enough. Andrea's scene is important for her character, but Frankie's scene shows the inciting incident. So, we've shown enough of Andrea, and Frankie gets longer screen time. Conciseness, economy. The show laid down the groundwork that it had two protags, then it economized what it showed about their work lives. Because it made the choice to arrange the groundwork first, it could pull off the economization. Efficiency. These types of things aren't very in your face or obvious, but even casual audiences can notice when one of these elements is absent. Knowledge and application of these make big differences in stories. Because these things are duly applied, we get more space in the runtime and therefore more information and more groundwork. We learn that the little girl in the beginning has grown up, and the Gwyn that Frankie found is the Gwyn she used to haul around by its umbilical cord. We learn that Frankie sometimes hallucinates, and she has a complicated relationship with her boss. We get to see these cool taser stick things. We have space for the hook at the end, when Andrea and Frankie break into one of the labs, get chased by a big-ass mecha, and it's revealed that Gwyn is still conscious and monstrously strong. That is a lot of things happening in 25 minutes, around the same runtime as Digital Circus Pilot, but it manages to do so much more. And compared to Digital Circus, it has way more to communicate too. The capitalism themes, the birth imagery, two protagonists' motivation, stakes and conflicts, the darker tones, among other things. Digital Circus takes place in one digital realm with only one, arguably two, settings directly important at the moment, and wrote its narrative around one protagonist during the episode, and yet, it's much more inefficient. I will say, to be fair, Night was written by Dana Terrace, a veteran in the animation industry, while Digital Circus was written by Gooseworks, who is not an industry vet. I acknowledge that it's unfair to expect the same quality from both shows when they're written by people with very different levels of experience. However, this is not an essay on fairness. It is an essay on inspecting Digital Circus Pilot as a litmus test for the rest of the show, and the pilot does herald the issues the rest of the series has. There is no one true metric that art can be measured by. Indie animation, and the adventures in general, really, are often known for less conventions and more freedom, so whatever storytelling limits mainstream studio animation has to work with don't apply to projects done by independent studios or creators. There is, however, a conversation to be had on why certain conventions have survived for so long throughout storytelling tradition, and how learning their basics can elevate a story from good to great, and how disregarding or ignorance of them can predict where a story is going to fall apart. The amazing Digital Circus, sadly, is kneecapped by its writers' inexperience. And in conclusion, the literacy crisis is going to be the end of us all.